afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our topic today, which is really in regards to the toolkit that we have accessible at the Career Reform website. We had been aware of the massive amount of downloads that were occurring for this particular tool. And from there, we started to get inquiries about, this is great, but I want to have a better sense as to how I can use it. How does it apply? How can I execute? What are the goals around it? So in searching for our November topic, it certainly seemed timely to answer the questions of the many people who asked us about this incredibly valuable tool. I also have in attendance my trusty partner, Jean Filipiak, who will be sharing her wisdom as we spend the next hour together. And as Kim had mentioned, any questions, you will have a message box and feel more than comfortable in putting your question in there, and I'll get to it at the end. Even if you have a question during it, don't hesitate to put it in there. It's not a problem at all, in that I can go through the stream of consciousness and certainly ask and answer in the order that they're arriving in the inbox. So don't hesitate to do that. We have a fair amount of people joining us today. So again, I want to emphasize to everyone, if we start to get a little bit late on time, I'm probably or might not get to all of your questions, but certainly be aware that we do answer questions through Facebook, Career Reform Facebook's page. We do answer through our Twitter, whether it's Joan Gracie's Twitter or Career Reform's Twitter. There are many, many different vehicles by which we will be happy to answer your particular question. So, I say to you, Jean, good afternoon, and welcome to our...
Afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So what we're going to be talking about is, as we start by looking at our adorable Anthony, who was one of our recent adopt-a-grads. That is part of our program, whereas we enlist the help of companies to invite recent college grads who are looking for their first career opportunity to engage with us in such a way that they get a student who's been career reformed. They've actually gone through a formalized coaching program and then come out certainly more aware of the rigors of the new normal economy than when they just came from the classic educational sector. So Anthony is certainly an example of one of our many success stories with this program, and certainly career reform and its information has been derived from employers that are affecting not only the local landscape, the national landscape, and in many cases the international landscape. So when we speak to you from Career Reform, which is our candidate portal, we speak to you from a place of the employer, learning from those individuals who come in, share their knowledge with us. As many people that I see and recognize on this call are aware, we have many employers that come into our facility, meet a group of people, and keep us in real time about the demands of what they're thinking and feeling. So as we're looking at our next slide, I'd like you to kind of start to contemplate. And I, like you, am a person who loves to learn. I'm a ferocious reader. The bulk of what I read tends to be business related because I truly enjoy staying on top of the trends as it relates to people, as it relates to leadership, as it relates to neuroscience. And I was reading an article, and I was really struck by a quote that one of the writers had shared, and it was a gentleman whose name is Jim Rohn, and he had said, "Formal education will earn you a living. Self-education will earn you a fortune. You decide how much of a fortune you want to earn by how willing you are to self-educate. And what we're talking about today in the 50 to 60 minutes that we have here together is your want, your need to self-educate. Because certainly an employer as your partner in business is going to give you the fundamental knowledge as it relates to his particular goal or outcome. But what I ask you to think about as you're looking at this toolbox is I ask you to spend just a few minutes thinking about your self-education and asking yourself before we continue with this workshop here today why you are here. And I don't mean why you're here, because obviously you're interested in learning more about our toolbox and the execution and the planning. That's a given. What I'm really talking about is why are you here? Why are you a listener today on this webinar? What's brought you here today? And it's very important that we spend a few minutes thinking about that, in that, why are you in the position that you're in? Why are you looking for a job at this point? What is it about your past that potentially has put you in this position for the future? All right. Why are you interested in this topic? Why are you in need of this information? These are all things that, as we continue to grow as individuals, self-directed individuals, which is really required for the workforce today, we have to ask ourselves, why are we here? Because there might be potentially a pitfall in our past that we maybe haven't thought about or dealt with, that we want to make sure that we don't continue to do for the future. Many people obviously make mistakes or misjudgments or miscalculations or whatever the case may be, but the difference is, what have you learned by that experience, and what are you bringing into your future, so that you're making sure that as you go on this educated journey, that you're not just looking at what we have in this toolbox is anything but an adjunct to a very holistic strategy. So if you decided that you were going to build a building and you were getting all your tools and people ready and resources to construct that, at the end of the day, you would have a very, very specific outcome in mind, and that is a completed building. And what I ask you to keep in mind is we're looking at these really strong tools, is I ask you to say, wait a minute, how are they an adjunct to me? Me as a person, me as a business model, me as an employee, me as an individual that could make a difference within an organization, all right? But in doing so, I have to garner more out of this particular arrangement or next position so that I'm deriving a specific outcome. That's a very important point, because I need to be strategic about building the business of me. I need to be aware about building the business of me, not only because an employer demands it, but because this is where the workforce is going. When you hear by 2020 we're all independent contractors, what that means is not necessarily you're giving a 1099, but what it means is that you've come to the determination that is completely and totally up to you to move yourself forward. And you can only do that by looking back and coming to terms with, you know what, maybe I stayed in my position too long. Maybe while I was in my position, I wasn't doing enough to hone my skills so that I would be desirable for this next job. Maybe I haven't embraced the world like I should. Maybe I haven't changed like I should. Maybe I'm not executing a plan. Maybe I'm going through the motions, but I'm not really setting goals for myself every week. I don't know what that why is. I don't know what that what is. I'm only challenging you to think about it as we go on this journey, because as I fondly say, tips are for kids. And that means that I can give you all the tips in the world, but if you don't have a strong, solid execution, it is going to be lost and really not successful as you're trying to execute what would be considered a good strategic job search today. So, as you look at the topics of what we're going to cover, please hold in your mind, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish by deriving a new role, selecting a new company, identifying a partner, however you want to phrase it, all right? It's important that as we look at this resume, we're keeping that in mind in consideration, because it's very important to the process of how these tools fit in to make that constructed building strong, viable, and sustainable for the future. All right? So, Jean, as we start to kind of break in and get more into the brass tacks, if you will, is there anything you would like to add, any thought, any comment, anything along those lines?
You know, Joan, everything you brought up to speed thus far, I'm glad you started out this way, only because many times I hear when a job seeker is looking for a position, the first thing they do is get a resume together, and they don't do the self-reflection that you just described to get them to the point where a resume could be devised. So I just want to reiterate that that self-reflection piece of what Joan was talking about is very critical, not only to build your resume, but as you get to understand the toolkit and the career reform way, it's really preparing you on how you present yourself overall to that next employer from that vantage point. So, you know, I hear it all day long in regards to, you know, I'm ready to look for a job, here's my resume, but they haven't put that thought into it.
Yeah, and pretty simply what we're talking about, Jean, is a strategy. So, you know, again, I need a job, you know, and I'll say this all the time, is you need a job, that's certainly an outcome, but it's not an outcome of strategy. And, you know, anybody could get a job, whether it's ethical, whether it's not, whether it's legal, whether it's not. You know, a way to derive an income is certainly possible through a variety of resources. But what you will find unequivocally with the most successful people is that they have that larger picture in mind, and that is being at the top of their craft or moving into a new career direction, whatever the case may be. They have more of an outcome above and beyond a job and a paycheck, you know. So I think that when we look at a resume, and everybody who's involved in the career reform process hears this from us all the time. And the reason why they do is because it tends to be very stinging. You know, it's a resume, not an obituary. Yet 99% of the resumes that we get talks more about the past than it does about the present, and it never mentions the future, ever. All right? So again, when you look at an obituary, currently they're not talking about the present. And certainly they're not talking about their future, because their future has now been moved to a different plane. At the end of the day, a resume should be a living and acting and breathing representation, in many instances having the ability to speak for you when you cannot speak for yourself. And I find that, again, the way people, you know, utilize this is to talk about their past, but what they don't understand is with that lifeless object, it really does not equate to the average employer about what does it mean for me as the reader? What does it mean for us as the company? So that tends to be lost on the average person. And we're going to go with the assumption that you actually get a person to read it, because needless to say, if you're responding to larger organizations and they have keyword searching and keyword sources, it's more important than ever to be aware of how your resume has got to be indicative from both a hard and soft skill standpoint of what a new economy employer is looking for. So what we always say is that you need to be putting together an informational package that speaks to your past, that speaks to your present, and absolutely speaks to your future. And you can only do that by starting with that self-reflection, identifying your next particular career goal. So what is this next job going to do for you? Not as a destination. If it's a destination job, great. But if it's just that next step on the journey, what is it and could it bring to you that you currently don't have? And that's the way that you should be looking at your background in relation to your future goal. So if you've been in a large organization and you now want small organization experience, if you've had a generalist role, but now you want to be more specific and you want to just take part of your background and relate it. Whatever the case may be, you have to make sure that you know where you're going. And building a strong resume that addresses that can then be flexible. It can be malleable. It can change based on the reader. What we always do here, because we have a very robust resume service, is, we give people a organic and true resume to who they are as a person, and then what we say is tweak it to the reader. But at least from a resume standpoint, you are representing yourself professionally. I can tell you that I am working on a director level position right now, and there is not one resume, not one, that my resume writer has not reformatted, rewritten, realigned, whatever the case may be, for a six-figure multi-city position. So again, this is not something that is lost on the average person. I mean, this is such a common occurrence. And from a brand standpoint, one that our listeners have to recognize, because it's very important that you are understanding that this is the first representation, and the power of that brand is very important to starting to set you apart. And when you're talking about your accomplishments, when you're talking about being concise, and how it looks, is it easy to read, all right? Does it talk about your career goals, which is your future? Does it connect them to the employer's needs, which is your future? Do you talk about what's unique about you and brings you to the forefront, all right? Have you shown proof on there? So how many people can just say what they want to say, and who's going to question it? It's kind of like, so much of what you see in social media today, or being a rock star or a movie star or whatever. Let's face it, anybody can say anything. Anybody can accuse anyone of anything. You can put it out there, and somebody might pick it up and they might run with it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So when you put together a resume that is simply a document of a bunch of tasks or skills that you've had, what you do is you start to relegate yourself what's considered more of an old-fashioned and certainly not progressive candidate versus someone who is with the times and is in tune with an employer's wants and needs. All right. So I think it's important that when you are looking at your resume, that you are viewing it personally and professionally as a script for your narrative, as a business plan, because it talks about your present, it talks about your future, as marketing collateral, because there should be items in there that clearly and succinctly say, this is the proof I'm not just saying this, this is the proof. Is it statistical proof? Is it data? Is it accolades? Is it, a quote from a reference? I mean, it could be a variety of ways. But what you recognize as the job seeker is, it is really, as the pharmaceutical industry used to call it, it is your brag book. It shows something quantifiable that an employer can look at and say, this person understands that I need evidence. I need proof, because they're not just saying that they had a 64% increase, but they're saying that they had a 64% increase in sales with an account that had been a 3-year project to be able to attain it all. All right. So whatever the case may be, it's understanding that the person who is reading it does not know about you. All right. I'm amazed at the amount of companies that people put on their resume, ABC company. And I come up and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have no idea what ABC company is. Am I supposed to Google ABC company? Am I supposed to do research on ABC company? Is that my responsibility as the reader? And I can't tell you how many people are like, yeah, well, I thought you knew. Well, no, I don't know all companies. And at the end of the day, neither do employers. And if they don't know what ABC company is, and that you've thought so little about explaining what ABC company is, because at the end of the day, that's also part of your branding. If you worked for ABC company, I want to know what type of company is it. And I want to know what your perception of what type of company it is. Was it a fast pace? Was it ever growing? Was it international? Whatever the case may be, it starts to set up this marketing collateral that starts to create a picture. And most people do not have the capability or the energy or the foresight or whatever the case may be to create that picture. So I think it's very important that we make sure that as we're looking at our resume, it speaks to all of those goals. So the past, the present, and the future. And then, is it easy to read, and is it going to serve you well as a person who stands out as a brand? So be thinking about that as you're looking at your resume, because I just see that formatting is terrible. It's so tough to read. It's like word vomit. How much can I get in there? And it's clear on the part of the reader that it was just like a painful exercise that you had to go through in order to facilitate a finished product. And clearly, it's not impressive. And would you buy it? Would you buy it? Jean, what would you like to add to the resume piece before we move on to the cover letters?
Would you buy it is a very strong statement, and candidates today have to really look at it from the lens of the employer when they feel it's a finished product. Throughout the, most recent years, I think the etiquette of resumes have gone out the window along with not even knowing about their strategy, Joan. So we were, on the screen that we have, we went through some bullets of resume etiquette. There are some still very truisms that remain within the resume etiquette world about correct spelling, and you mentioned neatness and really speaking to who they are and where they're going. In the toolkit itself, before we move on to cover letters, I think it's important that they connect the dots on how in the beginning you were asking the questions of the who, the why that brought them here, and then nicely on our sample resume that we gave, we're actually giving you the format of the introduction of who you are, the meat and potatoes of how you got there and how you can help another organization, and then how a resume should close today. And I think if you follow at least the template of the sample that we gave you, you're on your way to branding yourself as an employee of choice, specifically if you're looking at from the looking glass of that employer. And I'm excited that we're able to pull this webinar together from understanding this toolkit, because we're finally at an opportunity to give our audience and our readers the help that they need to be successful. Through your expertise, Joan, and even as we look towards the end of this program of how we can continue to help, our audience, the people who need it and want it. So I just
And
wanted to add that.
yeah, no, and I think that was great. That was very, very good information. And again, I think it's that understanding and willingness to know that you need to be consistently self-educated.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, this is not a toolkit that I have secured a position and now it gets recycled. All right. This is a toolkit that as your brand continues to grow and evolve, it continues to grow and evolve with you. All right. And you should be very cognizant of the different items that you're picking up with each new business relationship that you select and collaborate on. And I think again that's so important, because people look at this and say, okay, this is a one and done, and it is clear that's why the middle class is making less money than they did in 1989, because they think everything is static, and it doesn't maintain a long-term relationship, and it's not going to serve people well now, and it's clearly not, and into the future. So there's been a lot of controversy when it comes to cover letters and the validity. Do people read them? Do they not? You'll read many an article where people say, absolutely positively I love them, and other people that say, no, I don't read them. And again, this kind of goes back to your audience. I just think what is important is that everything today is about customization, which is why the job search process is so exhausting today. Building a career, building the brand of you is just so much more difficult than it has been in the past. And the reason being is because everything does need to be customized to that particular employer. And again, I relate it to dating. If you're on match.com and you're seeing a few different people at the same time, I mean, you might be talking about this particular subject with one person, another particular subject with another person, based on the connection, the interest, whatever the case may be. This is a very, very similar process in that as much as you are as a person, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And I think that when you're putting your cover letter together, again, we've given you a good infrastructure. We've given you a strong outline. But at the end of the day, it does need to be customized to the person. It needs to be customized to the company. And again, never to the extent where it's fake or artificial. And we see so much of that as people are going through the motions, I want this job, I need this job, this seems perfect to me. Again, if you were dating, you would never, unless you were a really uncomfortable or stalker like dater, say to somebody on that very first meeting, let's get married. All right, this is serious. Do I feel this? You feel this? It's again that first level of representation, and it starts to bring out the points that I've already highlighted in terms of your past, your present, and your future. Excuse me. And that has to continue within the confines of this cover letter. And when we give an infrastructure to a person, you might need 2 paragraphs. You might need 1. Again, it depends on where you are. If you're a millennium and this is your first career job, you might need 1 paragraph. You might need 2. But it's all about what is the most effective way to represent your brand. And Jean, you said something about resume etiquette earlier, and I'm going to kind of go back to that. And certainly there is resume etiquette. Technically you're not supposed to use me, I, it's supposed to go back 10 years. Yes. But at the end of the day, I think that the resume, cover letter, collateral, marketing, whatever it is that you decide works best within your brand can be incredibly creative. The problem is that 90-some% of the population will never do anything outside of a structure, which is why we give this toolkit to begin with. But I've seen primarily marketing people, some engineering people that have really done some very cool different type of things to get their brand out there, to get it noticed. And again, I see so many people that are hesitant to make that plunge. I coached an operations manager, and she was pending on a position where it just happened to be a completely male office. And she had done her research, and she had found out about the gender, and looked at the duties and responsibilities. And from the point that she delivered her resume, which was not via mail, it was actually a drop off, and she did it within the confines of treats and things of that nature. Basically she still went through the normal channels and got her resume in the way that was instructed, but she took the time to do something more caring, more understanding. She started to create this vision that I'm going to help you. I'm going to take care of this. Now, some people would say, well, yeah, is that a woman taking care of a man? I'm not here to debate that in the 60 minutes we have together. The only thing that I can say to you is that she started to create an image that she was very comfortable with, that was very true to who she was as a person, and she felt comfortable representing herself in that way, and continued that organic behavior throughout the interview process, and ultimately secured the position. And the success story is everything that she found out about that role, everything that she did to get that role was very much in line with the type of person she was and what she enjoyed doing. So I think the message here is that, you need to keep it real and you need to keep it organic, but you have to understand and get into the space and place of that reader and of that employer. And I've gotten cover letters where it had the wrong name and company on it. And I'm going to tell you right now, that happens monthly here. We get a ton of resumes. It happens monthly here, where people they don't have the time to customize it. And what I say is I'd rather see people having less contacts and more quality representations of their background, which is probably better to their strategy anyways. A lot of the millennials that I coach, it's a very, very targeted approach. We don't have like a multitude of things that are going on at one time. So they really get clever and very, very targeted to their audience. But unfortunately, when somebody is unemployed and they're searching, they tend not to treat it with the same type of mindset, because they're thinking, yeah, Joan, this is all great, but I need to get a position. And with each, passing day, week, months, it gets more into that self-fulfilling prophecy. The difficulty is that's usually too where you see people not being successful. They've kind of reached that dip and they're down at the bottom of the dip and they're not quite sure how to get out of it. So again, when you're looking at this cover letter, keeping in mind that it's succinct, it's an infrastructure, and it's going to prove to the reader that they're not on autopilot, that you're not on autopilot, and that you've sent it here because it makes sense to your past, it makes sense to your present, and it makes sense to your future. So as we look at our next slide here, when we talk about our strategy, we really kind of talked, about looking back so that we can look forward. All right. And Kim, I'm gonna have Kim is our creative director, and so I'm gonna have her unmute herself for a moment here, because certainly from a smartphone application, there's so many great ways that you can be keeping track of your job search. And again, I have to be honest, it is incredibly frustrating to me how few people know what they're doing in their job search. It absolutely boggles my mind. Again, this is a major investment of you as a person, of your time, as your potential future partner. I mean, I would almost bet that if you were out looking for a house, you would remember what houses you went to. All right. Very few people take the time to get organized. and there's great smartphone applications. The point of the matter is you need to. Oh, and Kim, you have on here Jibber Jabber. And that certainly is a great one. Are there any new ones that you've been seeing from an organizational standpoint that will help the listeners kind of stay on task with their job search process?
Um, there's another great job specific app called Huntsy, and that's another great one. But
How do you spell that, Kim?
Huntsy.
Okay.
So those two apps are probably the most popular in terms of job search organization.
Okay.
And then obviously there are a ton of task organizational apps that you can use, and spreadsheet apps that pretty much act as an Excel spreadsheet right on your cell phone, so you can fill it out in real time as you're completing each task for each application that you submit. But really, the goal strategy worksheet, the whole point of it is it's the research process. So you're supposed to have all your research and reconnaissance before you start putting in those submissions. You want to take a look at what the job requirements are within your field. Do you have everything on the list? Are there job openings within your demographic? Does it make sense? Are you going after something that's realistic? And then once you've established that realistic approach, you need to be diligent about keeping your goals strategy worksheet up to date.
Very good. Great explanation. Thank you, Kim. And what I would say is a adjunct to that is that let's just keep in mind that when an employer puts together a posting, when they put together a job description, again, they're pretty much looking for, Jesus. All right. In most instances, they've listed a lot of things. And it might come down from somebody who's an engineer who goes to the human resource person and says, listen, I want these things. And they don't have a clue as to what the talent market looks like. Is there a talent shortage? They don't know any of those things. They need this person, and that's all they know. So be very mindful of the fact, especially if you do have a particular skill in a great industry, be mindful of the fact that if you have 70% of what they're looking for, definitely customize your resume, your cover letter as succinctly as possible. What's been very interesting about when I coach people, and I tell them that, they take my advice and they send it out, and then they'll say to me, well, I can't believe they called me, I don't have everything. And I'm like, well, that's a little scary, because you're not connecting the fact that clearly, when they wrote the job description, they were looking for Jesus. They have not found a person who is 100% of what it is. But you have represented yourself past, present, and future. They're seeing something. Now what you need to do is you need to connect that dot for them in a verbal way, because in many instances we go to a phone interview, all right? So the goal strategy worksheet is a tool that has so many different applications to it, one of which Kim highlighted. But it also might lead you down a pathway to say, oh my goodness, in doing this goal strategy worksheet, I see that there's a lot of positions in this particular part of my background. When I see the keyword indicator, when I look at the amount of jobs that have just this word in it, it seems like there's a trend upward. Should I maybe then take my background and move into that niche, move into that strategy? So just as we got you to think about yourself in a holistic form when we started, we're just reiterating that point with the goal strategy worksheet. And that's the wonderful thing about Indeed, and the reason why we like that particular search mechanism so much, because indeed.com is definitely one that does a great job of letting you search by keyword and seeing exactly what is going on in the marketplace. And then taking that even to the next step by going to the ONET, which is, the Department of Labor's description of particular positions. But what the onet.org, correct, Jean? onet.org?
onetonline.org.
Okay, thank you.
It's an online meeting.
onetonline.org. Okay, thank you. What they do very well is they give you a projection of what that particular industry looks like, past, present, and in the future. So you might think, well, wow, this seems like a really great niche. You do some more research on the ONET, and all of a sudden you're finding out that, you know what? This might be something that if I get into, might be starting to slow down. And that's okay, but I need to prepare for that slowdown. And see, again, that's what a lot of people don't do. They might be a manual machinist, and then they're working for a company that requires manual machines. But then guess what? That company, for whatever reason, is sold or goes out of business, and all of a sudden that person doesn't have the skills to be a machinist. So you have to be very, very cognizant of your toolbox, and is it keeping up to the wants, needs, and desires of an employer? And that becomes the question of the hour. And when you look at the collateral pieces, you'll see that we have them broken down into step one, and it's really a research piece. And then it gets more into, wait a minute, above and beyond what you're just seeing out there, if you're noticing a trend, do you know a person who might be within the confines of that trend? If you're seeing a lot of openings at Moog, do you have a neighbor who works at Moog? So it takes you through not only the mindset of what's readily available, but what about that underground? What about those people that exist within the underground that potentially might be a light source for you, a light force to get you into an opportunity that isn't readily advertised or available? And I can say to you from a career reform standpoint, that's where we see most of our candidates go. Again, it's more work, but at the end of the day, it sets them apart as a different type of person. Master networkers, those individuals that take any opportunity to get out, pass out their own personal cards, share their narrative, all of those type of things, and really are keeping a good organizational chart of who a potential influencer might be. And I just think that the holidays are such a great time to be inviting people out for a holiday drink, or, coffee, or, everybody's in like a feel-good type of place. So we talk about, LinkedIn. What are your LinkedIn goals? What are your network goals? And, again, we're getting back to that goal thing again. I just think that very few job seekers, whether they're working or not working, are going into a month and saying, at the end of the month, this is where my job search is going to be. And if this is where it's going to be, then guess what? This is where it needs to be at week 4. This is where it needs to be at week 3. This is where it needs to be at week 2. And this is where it needs to be at week 1. There's not that specific goal. There's not that specific number. And therefore, guess what? A week blends into a month, becomes 2 months, 3 months. You have to devise a plan that supports your outcome, and you have to work the plan. And it is work. And whenever I coach people and we really get down to the brass tacks of actually how many hours per week they're spending on the job search process, it's very little time. And at the end of the day, if you're spending 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, whatever the case may be, are you realistic about what your outcomes are? For a working person, it might be different. I'm going to spend one Sunday a month, and I'm going to do all of this in one Sunday because that makes the most sense to me, and I can stay true to that schedule. Whatever it is that fits in with you and your natural behaviors, or whatever the case may be, you need to make sure that you're keeping that in mind and being true, because a plan is not a plan without execution, and it takes baby steps in order to accomplish. So as we're kind of looking at the continuation of what's actually in your job search kit, and you have a better sense, we kind of already touched on this getting organized. So I'm going to kind of let you take that and say, well, geez, Joan, that seems so baseline. Well, I can't tell you how many people we contact that aren't organized. And I'm in the heat of year-end searches right now. I have all different high-level positions going on that ideally my employers want filled by December. And I have to be honest with you, it is very, very unusual that people are ready and prepared for my call, for my assistant's call, from somebody from my office call. And that's a clarifier sign that it's okay for them to live in disorganization, but they don't want an employer to live in disorganization. And it is just one of the most unimpressive ways to present your brand. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Jean, anything you'd like to input and add?
Frankly, Joan, sometimes in many cases get immediately disqualified. I think, that's such a huge connection for our audience to make. Their behaviors can be a total depiction of how they're going to be acting in their employer's environment, and employers are looking at that and scrutinizing that every step of the way. So I agree with get organized, but there is a story I want to tell in regards to step 2, make new connections and network, Joan. There
Sure.
was we had a career enhancer who, for all intents and purposes, to fast forward the story, was a career enhancer where the person knew what he liked, what he was doing. He was just ready for that next step in his career. And because he was ready to start preparing for this next step in his career and start looking for opportunities, he identified a company that he saw himself working for. And in preparation, he called one of his old colleagues and called him for a reference. And that reference, was speaking to him, and he was just like, oh, good, this is where you are in your career, and they're going back and forth. At the end of that conversation, so the outcome of that conversation, if you will, was the reference, as the job seeker was getting approval, turned around and said, you know what, I'd like to talk to you in person in depth about this reference. So they went for coffee, and he ended up getting a job out of that whole effort of preparation. And that was a position that enhanced his background. So from that standpoint, making new connections and looking who is in your network is very critical, because you don't know the opportunities that could lie within your preparation. Back to you.
Great story, Jean. Great point. And I think that, again, when we're talking about that, we're really reiterating that underground. We're really talking about the jobs that certainly exist, but again, to the average seeker, it's what's in front of them. See, they can only see what's in front of them. They're not looking with binoculars. They're not looking with a microscope. They're only seeing what is in front of them. And because of that, they are missing out on so many different opportunities that exist around them. All right, that they just don't even tax that brain of theirs to consider. And I think, again, when you're talking about that position, though, what happens is it's not an interview at all. And see, it's not a job search at all, because what I'm doing is I'm calling a person I know. So even the way that individual presented it and had coffee, everything was so informal. And what I find today is that everybody makes everything so formal. Not the employer, the job seeker does. Like, everything is so much more magnetized, which is why they're not presenting themselves naturally. They're doing the whole Academy Award performance. They're saying and adding stuff that absolutely isn't who they are as a person, because they have no idea who they are as a person or their value to an employer at this time. And on and on it goes. So again, I think it's very, very important that we get that message out, that you have a very strong sense of what the world is like, and you are listening to 2 senior veterans who have been in this, collectively for almost 50 years, and we can say to you, it's not what you think it is. I just had a seminar, and this candidate told me everything that I should know, but funny, I've been doing this for decades. I don't think you know, because and I think that's the point, is that it's so different, it's so unique. And when it comes to this holistic this ability to use a smartphone, I've told this story because it's still mind-blowing to me, about a sales rep who had been downsized from a position, went to an interview 4 months later, and they got to talking about smartphones, and the employer was sharing about smartphones, and he said, oh yeah, he's not real comfortable with smartphones. And I mean, this is a guy in his 40s, he's not in his 80s. And the employer called me and said he couldn't have gone to Verizon and learned how to work his smartphone. I mean, the guy's been unemployed for 4 months. I mean, what is he doing? Why isn't he enhancing his skills? Again, self-educated. And, what am I supposed to say to the employer? I mean, as the recruiter, did I know the guy couldn't operate a smartphone? Did I even think I had to ask it? Well, clearly now I see I do. But at the end of the day, that's the type of thing that I'm talking about. When I told the candidate, I'm like, look, this is the way he looks at it. You've been looking for months, and you don't know how to operate your own phone. Well, guess what? They do a lot on their smartphone. And guess what? Employers are advertising jobs on their smartphone. They're tweeting about it. And again, what does your brand look like? Because I cannot believe the amount of eggs that are on LinkedIn. I can't believe it. All right? That somebody would have an egg on LinkedIn. I can't believe that we still have people on Facebook in inappropriate poses. I mean, really? All right? But this still is part of this world that the job-seeking population has created that does not mesh with the employer world. It is absolutely different planets.
Yeah, it's a job-seeking population, and then I also have to go inside. There's employees that are behaving this way that they could be a lot more marketable if they improve their brand from an online consistency and become more tech-savvy also. And then you find yourself being recruited out at times.
Without a doubt.
And up to date.
Without a doubt. And I think that's the thing. And, those are the type of, thoughts and comments, and, you really have to take some time thinking about. And I think what we certainly have done, over our time together as we kind of get into the question part of our presentation. So we're certainly going to let everybody here now as they're kind of taking a few minutes to think of what questions they'd like me to answer. Is I think what has been clear is that the term organic is something that is incredibly important. And if you don't know yourself in such a way that you're confident in speaking, well, you know what? We have a tool for that. Certainly, we use the DISC assessment, which I can say to you on an ongoing basis. And Kim, if you could just go to one of our promotions for right now so that our listeners can take a look at that, that would be wonderful. Then take this time. I mean, self-educate yourself. Really spend the time to better understand why is it that you're having difficulty on an interview. It might be a one-on-one coaching. It might be practicing your narrative. It might be getting somebody to take a look at your resume. I mean, I just can't understand why people still think that they can build a career like your dad did or your grandpa did. You can't even build a career like your older sibling did. I mean, that's how quickly things are changing. And we have a question here that talks about, what about if you've had a mistake or hiccup in your background? And what I can say is, when you read my book, No More Bad Advice, and it talks about the reality that, you own a business, and the business you own is your background. And again, people are not perfect. Employers get people are not perfect. I think the major thing that we have to understand is that we have to be prepared to address what is the mistake we've made or what problem we've had, and we need to be prepared to counteract that. And the second part of it is, how does that reflected on a resume? Well, again, you wouldn't highlight a mistake per se on a resume, but if you do have, let's say, like a job lapse or something along those lines, I'm going to say to you that is a red flag to an employer. So if you leave that blank, they're gonna wonder what you were doing. All right. So what I always suggest to people is that if there is something that you've been doing while you're serving, whether you've gone there, education, maybe you develop a based business, whatever the case may be, you're going to make sure that your resume is updated accordingly. Again, think about your brand. Think about potentially how your brand is perceived by the reader, and then obviously in accordance, really adjust it, because it is something that an employer in your absence without an explanation, it makes it difficult. If you've been in a position where maybe you've been taking care of an ailing parent, because we see a lot of people that are doing staying home for childcare reasons. Again, don't leave an opportunity for an employer to wonder, because it will never go your way. Well, they just won't contact you. They'll go to an assumption place, and I've never seen a candidate win in that place in space. So you need to be that. So another person asked about products. Yes, everything is on Career Reform, www.careerreform.com. We've got all our products listed there. You have the promotion that you have to put in, Job Envy. I love it, because we're very, very thankful to say that the bulk of the people that apply this knowledge, and the key word is apply this knowledge, are incredibly thankful and appreciative. And I can tell you, this is working from 16 to 61. The knowledge we're sharing, the inside secrets, this stuff works, but you have to execute. And if you're not executing, if you're not moving that ball forward every single week, you will not get the outcome you desire. So I know this has been a lot of content. I know there's a lot of it. Again, don't hesitate to go to Twitter. We'd love to hear your feedback on Facebook, whatever the case may be. Jean, we are getting to the witching hours, so we're finalizing here. Any last items that you'd like to include?
We're the biggest cheerleaders of this program because we know it works, Joan, but I will challenge you to really go and listen to read the testimonials and listen to the testimonials of the people who have been in your shoes and really took the coaching and took the process and ran with it, and they either found their dream job in the sense of a career that they love, or they're in the process of doubling their income within the past 3 or 5 years. And I think if you make this investment in yourself, that self-directed approach, you see the outcomes being very fruitful, depending on your strategy.
Very good, very good. That sounds great. So I think we're running on time and we're closing out. We want to thank all our participants. Again, any questions, don't hesitate to use the vehicles we suggested. And in the meantime, no matter where you are in the country, get ready for some type of climate change, and I wish you a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you.